students, welcome back to video class, at least for now. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about lots of different objectives in the Environmental Natural Resources unit. We've looked at trees and forestry. We've looked at wildlife and agencies that are in North Carolina that protect and conserve the welfare of our wildlife populations. We've been looking at careers that are connected to those things. All of that also is dependent, the trees and the wildlife, on soils and water quality. And that's what this video today is going to be focusing on. We're going to look at soil structures, soil types, the soil triangle, looking at what are the different properties that would allow certain soils to be used for special things better than others, and looking at how the water affects those soil properties and what that allows the soil to be able to be used for. For example, can you build a house on it? Can you put a landfill there? Can you put a cemetery there? Will the house, can it support something as large as like a school? Can you put a bridge over that? There's lots of different land uses that we don't commonly think about that's all dependent on the soil. So if you were to happen to see a really pretty piece of property that's in a perfect location in your mind, but is really cheap, it may be that there's something under that soil that the current landowners know that's limiting the ability to use that land for something specific, like maybe residential development. But agriculture, we're able to use lots of land, sometimes with a little extra modifications and amendments to the soil, but we're able to maximize the use of it pretty good. Farmers have gotten pretty darn good at figuring out how to get the most out of the land without depleting all of its nutrients so that future generations can use that. And that word is called sustainability. Here's a cornfield we planted about 3 weeks ago, and it's up and doing pretty good. Now on down in here, there's what we call some loamy soils, and loamy soils is probably the ideal average best soils you can have for agricultural production. But over here, you'll see there's no corn that has been planted. And the reason for that was my husband was not going to waste his time or money on seeds and fertilizer and fuel for the tractor if there was very little chance that anything was going to produce from it. So we're not going to plant corn here because, as you can see in my hand, this is mostly sand. Looks just like the beach on down there. The Mother Nature, the earth, just as the soil type and the parent material eroded over time, it was sandstone of some nature, and so obviously as the soil eroded, it created sand. And sand is what we call light land. It can't hold a lot of nutrients typically, and so if you need to put a crop in there that needs lots of high amounts of nutrients, sandy soil tends to dry out faster, doesn't hold moisture, and then it also doesn't hold those nutrients. And so crops like cotton in this part of North Carolina does really well on sandy soils. Pine trees do great. So if you have really sandy soils, a lot of times we'll plant pines because they like acidic soils, and sandy tends to be acidic. Sandy soils tend to have an acidic pH, which means they have a pH lower than 7.0 on the pH scale. If you see a mud puddle and there's water just sitting there, that's a great indicator, and the water's been sitting there, that it's probably a clay-based soil. Now, I picked some of this up in my hand, and it's very sticky and slimy, and it sticks together very easily. You push on it, that's an indicator that clay is the smallest soil particle type, and it holds water. That's that soil superpower, and we know that's true because when I turn the corner here, you can see a pretty body of water, a little pond. And this pond is able to stay filled with water and not drain down low, because if we were to dig down just a couple of inches anywhere in that pond, this is what you would find, this clay base. And it's basically like a sealant. Think about it. Clay pots hold water, right? Back in the day, even now, you can get terracotta clay pots. But before we had all this fancy industry, hundreds of years ago, they would dig this out and they would make their own, plates and bowls and pots out of this. Because when it dries, it sticks together and it becomes basically waterproof. So if you were to come over here and look, though, we had an erosion issue even with the clay. And so what you see here is something called riprap, this large pieces of rock that's very large. They bring it in, they put it in areas where something like gully erosion happens. And this was where we had water coming and draining down. and it was just eroding away, gully erosion pretty bad. And so once we put this riprap down on all of these culverts, is that black pipe going in, it drains the water off of all this property as it comes down, and then moves it into to keep this this pond filled up. So most ponds have a clay-based bottom. Clay is sticky in structure and texture, and it's very, very small. The opposite of clay would then be sand. And clay also, just like it holds water, it tends to hold on a little bit longer to some nutrients as well. Let's talk for a few minutes about different types of erosion that happens to soils. Now, different soil types are more erodible than others, but right here you can see what we call gully erosion. And gully erosion happens a lot of times where you see ditches. It's worse in the mountains where there's steeper slopes. Here in flatland in eastern North Carolina, we don't have to deal with gully erosion as much, except along the edges of fields typically. But this is from the power and the quickness of moving water. So as gravity pulls it down, and as it pulls it downhill, it carries with it, it picks up speed and force, and it will carry off soil with it. And erosion is all it is the displacement of soil from somewhere that it's supposed to be to somewhere that it's not. And when you have erosion going into something like this pond behind me, it causes all kinds of problems that landowners don't want to deal with, especially if you're trying to conserve the water quality, because whatever's on the soil is being leached, being moved into that body of water. This is a cornfield that was harvested in probably September or October, and you can see that there's not anything green out here right now, and we are getting it ready actually to come back behind and plant soybeans in it in a couple of months. But you can see, I pulled this up, this is what was left out in the field. The combine had cut the top off of it and stripped the ear of corn off of it. You can see remainders of the shucks right here. That was what the corn had been in. And you can see this right here. The combine, the harvester, takes the kernels off. That's the only thing the farmer gets paid for. All of this, it's garbage. But it sits here on the ground and is used to help with the remaining roots, hold any soil in place. So if I can get one right here. So we watch it. See those roots right there? There we go. And it has soil right there that's helping to hold into place. And then when we go to plant the next crop, we will not come out here and till this up. We literally have a special planter called a no-till planter. It's a type of tillage that's encouraged to reduce erosion, and it uses hydraulics to just, like your fingers, it just goes shh, 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 like that, and it shoots into the soil very fast, rapidly, as it goes through the field. It's like 26,000 seeds per acre typically for corn. I can't remember what it is for soybeans. But this is an example of a no-till field. For this segment, I want to talk about soil amendments, and you can see right there is a large pile. If I pan over here, you can see a pile, a dark brownish black pile here. Soil amendments are things that farmers can put on their cropland that will help the crops grow better. Now, it may be something related to the pH of the soil. It may be a nutrient that specific crop they're intending to grow may need in extra amounts that the soil doesn't naturally is able to provide for the roots to take up and allow that plant to grow healthy and strong and to have a strong harvest, to be fruitful. What you see here, if you're as close as I am to it, it's pretty strong smelling. This is actually what they call chicken litter. Now, we're in eastern North Carolina, and there's a whole lot of turkey and chicken houses, broiler houses, and every 6 weeks a broiler house turns over from start to finish, ready for it to go to become chicken nuggets, and they have to gut those chicken houses, and there's a lot of litter. There's the original bedding that was in the bottom of the house mixed in with feathers that fell off the birds, manure for 6 weeks mixed in. It might even be a composted down, broken down, a chicken that might have, got injured or died somehow. And it's all mixed in here, but it's all natural, it's all living. And so every bit of this is what we call organic fertilizer, and some people are really adamant and strong support of organic farming methods. Well, this is what you would use. And so we would have a spreader, and we would put it in a special piece of farm machinery, and we would spread it evenly over the entire field. And it takes, when you use organic fertilizers, it takes a lot longer for it to be broken into the, like worked into the soil. And so we have to spread it a couple of months prior to we're actually planting and actively growing the crop that we're trying to produce, so that it has time to really kind of break down and let the rainwater leach it into the soil and allow it to be absorbed in a format that will be absorbable by the plant's roots. So this is would be high nitrogen and some other micronutrients, but mostly a whole lot of nitrogen, which certain things, certain crops, all crops need for green growth.